Did you know that spousal sponsorship applications require 19 different pieces of documentation? Preparing a Canadian spousal sponsorship application can be a stressful process. The application guides are not clear, and navigating the application process, especially if you're a busy person who's working or with children, can be complicated and also a stressful process. If you're reading online, you'll see horror stories of clients who have submitted a spousal sponsorship application only to have it returned months later for missing documentation or signatures. So today I'll be going through spousal sponsorship applications and how you can successfully prepare your own spousal sponsorship or common law spousal sponsorship application for bringing your spouse or partner to Canada. My name is Jade Calver and I own and operate Calver Immigration Consulting Inc. We're a full-service immigration firm located in Ontario, Canada. So first we start with the sponsor. So that is the person who is the Canadian or permanent resident who's going to bring their spouse to Canada. So the sponsor needs to include their passport or Canadian birth certificate to show that they're a Canadian. If you're a permanent resident, then you need to include your passport as well as your permanent resident card. That can be expired or valid. And then next is you need to show that you have enough money to sponsor your spouse or partner to Canada. So what that looks like is most people will have an employment letter as well as a recent notice of assessment from the CRA. If your employment letter doesn't exist because you're self-employed, you can include business documentation. If you're not working, then I usually include proof of savings for you as a couple, just to show that you as a sponsor have enough money to bring your spouse to Canada. There's no income requirement. You're actually exempt as a spouse from the income requirement when you're bringing your partner to Canada. However, you do have to show that they won't access public funds once they come to Canada. So I generally like to show at least about $15,000 Canadian if you're not working. If you're working, then this is a non-issue. Next, we have the principal applicant's documentation. So that is your passport. So you and all accompanying children, you need to include a passport for them. Birth certificates from your home country. If they're not in English or French, make sure to have them translated by a certified translator. Next, you'll need either your marriage certificate if you're married to the sponsor, or if you're common law, then you need to include a set of common law documentation showing that you have been living together for at least 12 months, as well as a notarized declaration. After that, you have to include a divorce certificate if you have any previous marriages. Same thing for the sponsor, so don't forget the Canadian sponsor. If you've been married previously, you need to include that divorce certificate. Next are police clearances for anyone who is being sponsored, so anyone who's immigrating who is 18 years old or older. You need to include a police certificate from any country in which you have lived for 6 months or more. And then next, permanent resident photos for everyone who is immigrating. So these are Canadian PR photos, which measure 2 inches by 2 3/4 inches. And don't forget to put the correct information on the back. The rest of the documentation in the application is to show that you and your partner's or spouse's relationship is legitimate. In order to show this legitimacy, you need to include a few different types of information. So all applicants need to include the following. So if you're not living together, proof of contact and visits. If you're living together, I include proof of cohabitation. Next is another set of documents. In the document checklist from the government, they say you don't need to include anymore if you meet the following criteria. So if it's the first marriage for both of you, you have children together, and if you've already been married for 2 years. However, I always include all of this documentation for every couple, just so that the visa officer doesn't ask for any additional documentation during processing. So what this looks like is photos of your spouse and you at different dates and times. So do not include 20 selfies. I have you do marriage photos, photos from when you were dating, if you have kids, photos with your children or one another's children, your other outings, if there's been any other wedding celebrations. And I put it in chronological order, and it's used to tell the officer the narrative of your relationship. So when did you first start dating? How did your relationship progress? where are you now in your relationship, it needs to tell a story. After that, we want to see proof of financial interdependence. So if you're living together in Canada, this would be a lease together. A joint bank account is for everybody. I always say you should have some sort of joint bank account. If you own a house together, anything that you have together that shows that you depend on one another financially can be really helpful. If you don't have the joint bank account because you can't open one, then money transfers to one another is the second best thing. After that, we like to see letters of support from your friends and family. So I usually say 4 to 5 per side. So the sponsor as well as the sponsored person would have their family members prepare these letters just to show that they support the relationship. Additionally, if you use social media, then I would have that included in your application as well. So if you use Instagram or Facebook, just public posts showing one another as your spouse. And then lastly, you also need to double check the country requirements for your specific country. So for example, if you're sponsoring someone from Cuba, they'll have specific documents that you need to include from that country. Likewise for Saudi Arabia, every country will have its own specific documentation. And then there are a few additional documents you might need to include for your unique situation. For example, if you're sponsoring your spouse and their child who is not your biological child, then you'll need to include either custody documents for that child or an attestation from their biological parent showing that they're allowing them to come to Canada. So as you can see, the spousal sponsorship application process can be tedious when it comes to putting the evidence together. If you have any questions about how to gather evidence or fill the forms and file your spousal sponsorship application, please do get in touch. We are online at calverimmigrationservices.com.